Welcome to the CFB Dynasty Podcast with hosts Matt Knowles and Brian McElfish.
Hey everybody, how you doing out there? It's 2023. This is the first show of the new year. This is also the first show of the off season for CFBDynasty.com. My name is Matt Knowles. Down there on the other side over here, that's the founder of CFBDynasty.com, Brian McElfish. Also joining us today, a very special guest, Mr. Doug Gravely. How you guys doing today?
Good. How are you?
All right, so I'm going to direct something here to Doug real quick. So Doug is the newest member of the CFB Dynasty Home League. You've heard us talk about the Home League, where it all started. Doug has only been in it for a couple of years, but Doug this year actually went to the college fantasy finals. Unfortunately for Doug, he got slapped down by the curse master himself, Gordy Miller. But Doug said, you know what? Hex Miller. So Doug said, you know what? I'm not satisfied with that. I'm also going to go to the Pro Championship. In the Pro Championship, he also got slapped down by Mike Davis, but not so fast, my friend. As we all know, championship week was marred by the Damar Hamlin incident. So Doug and Mike Davis decided they were going to play again. And for a third time, Doug got slapped down. So Doug, here's my question to you. What do you feel about being the only person in the history of CFB Dynasty to lose 3 championship games in the span of one season? What's your take on that, Doug?
Man, my take on it is that I was on the struggle bus. I think I was faking it, trying to make it, and I just couldn't pull it off in the end, dude. Like, I think I am probably the only one to lose 3 fantasy championships in 1 year.
Oh, in history.
Which is great.
You are the Buffalo Bills of our league.
100%. You know, I think losing the college fantasy championship by 0.2 hurts worse than getting absolutely demolished like I did in the Pro Championship. But, hey, man, all I can say is I'm going to come back, be stronger next year, and maybe I'll win both. Who knows?
And you know what, though, even though giving you some hassle there, everybody would have traded positions with you to be able to have that chance, to have that shot. I know BMAC would have traded positions with you, right, BMAC? So how you doing, BMAC? How's everything going here in 2023 for you? Let's talk about what's going on in CFB Dynasty and the kind of plans you have for the new year on CFBDynasty.com.
Yeah, so we have new tools that we're not really going to talk about until we can kind of demo them, and we'll probably demo them only with people on the Discord, and we'll really try and get that rolling as we get to 2023 content creation. So we're working on we'll have freshman rankings that come out first, and those will come out after the second and final signing day of this cycle. And then we'll get into depth charts and rankings for, all the top positions and keep updating Devi and all the rankings that we push. And that's all super exciting. I always love this time of year because it's filled with hope. You've got new players to research and player rankings. So today, though, we're going to kind of look at what did we do wrong so we don't make those same mistakes again, and just kind of talk about some of the misses and some of the hits over the course of 2022.
Yeah, one of the biggest focus of today's show is going to be what we learned during the 2022 season. There's a great article. If you go up to CFBDynasty.com, there's a great article up there. We're actually going to go through it right now. So BMAC, why don't we pull that article up and let's talk about some of the things that we learned during this season.
Yep. All right. So I've got it up on the screen. If you're on the podcast, you'll just have to check it out. You can go to news and articles and it'll be the most recent one if you're up there now. So we're looking at the data, looking at the stats, of course. So kind of the way we'll do it. And you can go in and click on the best college fantasy performers by position. So this is a great resource, especially if you're new to fantasy and you don't know, all right, what to do at all. You're kind of overwhelmed by, the difference in the teams in the NFL from what you're used to 130 plus teams in college, like who does good and what are the trends. This is a good place to start. So you can click through and see. So if you have quarterbacks, we list out the top 5 and then you can see all of them ranked. after that. So we've got that for each position. And then what we did is we kind of took a look back, going right before the season, our final rendition of our preseason rankings in our draft guide, and kind of just, see how we did. What did we do wrong? And some of it is just, players obviously are going to break out all over the place. Like receivers is certainly a spot there where it's kind of more difficult to predict than running backs and quarterbacks. But also there's things to learn, and we'll get into all that stuff. But yeah, stuff like Tyjae Spears. He finished the season second in fantasy points. We had him. I can't remember where he had him, but he was a miss for us. And he was someone who was on my board, and I missed on him in our own drafts. He was someone I loved. He just couldn't have an injury-free season until this past year, and he absolutely killed it. So if anything, I will go more with my gut. And same thing for Muhammad Ibrahim. Like, we had him higher than everyone else in the industry, but still not high enough. And
wasn't he ranked number 20 in the preseason?
I think a little bit better. He was way down the list on a lot of other rankings just because of coming off the ACL. It was the Achilles, and that's a tough injury to come off of. But he was hurt the first game of last season against Ohio State, talking 2021. So he had the full off season there to kind of heal up and get better. And man, he had a great, consistent fantasy year. Finished number 3.
You see, my man crush is right there at number 4, Israel Abanikanda, a guy that wasn't even on anybody's board to start the year. Jumps up there and really changed a lot of fantasy football fortunes as the year went on.
Yeah, so it was good. Some good and bad, obviously, looking back at preseason rankings and kind of what we thought was going to happen and how it actually happened. So we're going to certainly make fun of ourselves on some of our mistakes and learn from that. But as you go into the article, so you can get past the, just the top CFF performers, you've got the breakdown of each position. So at quarterback, we take a look at, all right, which conferences produce the best quarterbacks in terms of fantasy. And for this sake, we're looking at someone who would be, if you have a 2 quarterback league, this would be all your starters. So the top 24 quarterbacks of fantasy. You probably immediately think of like, Caleb Williams, Bo Nix, Bryce Young, and DTR, and some of those from the SEC and Pac-12. Those 2 conferences made almost 45% of the top 24 quarterbacks, which is kind of crazy, especially when you think of the data that you'll see in a minute at receiver. But anything stand out here to you guys on this pie chart looking at, Pac-12 and SEC dominance for quarterbacks?
I mean, I kind of expect Pac-12 to have some dominance at the quarterback, maybe even skill positions, because I'm not a big fan of their defenses very often.
Yep.
The SEC is kind of surprising because they're a conference that's usually known for having kind of tough defenses to play against. So it's pretty surprising to me that the SEC is actually, as high as they are in the percentage column.
I think it's really interesting that you have your Power 5 conferences that basically dominate this entire pie chart. You would think in college fantasy, where we're just looking at just the stats, that you're going to have more of your group of 5 because when you get into the season, deeper into the season, and the group of 5 are playing against each other, you're going to have a lot more higher scoring games than, say, the MAC or the Sun Belt. So it's interesting to see that those Power 5 conferences do dominate here, pun intended.
True. Yeah. So, and those SEC guys are going to be gone. Like you think of Hendon Hooker, Stetson Bennett, Bryce Young, all gone. Whereas, Caleb Williams is coming back, Bo Nix, Michael Penix, Cam Rising. Pac-12 is going to be the place potentially for quarterbacks in 2023.
Mm-hmm.
So as you scroll down, you'll see a little scatter plot there that you can interact with. So not all of the players' names are listed below the chart, but as you hover and click on the dots, you'll see, who's there and where they finished. on the scale, with points being on the left side, and then a little donut chart for by class. So if you're going into the season and you're totally new to college fantasy, there's some general rules here like that you can look at. So for quarterbacks, seniors made up 43% of the top 24 quarterbacks in fantasy. Juniors made up 43%. Sophomores just 9%, and 5% were freshmen. So hugely in favor there for juniors and seniors and quarterbacks. Does that change the way you think or would draft in a standard like redraft league?
Here's what I would say. I'm interested to see how that pie chart looks, or that graph looks, say in 1 or 2 years. And the reason I say that is because right now I think that it might be skewed a little bit, because we don't know if a junior is really a junior or if he's a super senior.
Yeah, true.
And I think there's so many people that are upperclassmen that, look at Harris. Harris is coming back for his 7th year this time. So he's a super senior.
Yep.
So I think that once we get past the COVID extensions for players, we might see that graph even out just a little bit. But it definitely would make me think twice about drafting a freshman or a true sophomore quarterback, unless they're a Patrick Mahomes, somebody that is going to come in and really take over.
Yep. Definitely.
What about you, Doug?
Yeah, I think you got to be careful drafting the young quarterbacks. You're not always going to have like a Drake May, for example, who just kind of comes on and seems like he puts everything together at once.
And that was the exception. That was the freshman exception, right?
I figured. I think on my personal team, I probably have more junior and senior quarterbacks than anything. Mm-hmm. And like you said, Matt, you got those guys that seem like they've been seniors for 3 or 4 years. So it's kind of hard to distinguish which one's which at this point.
Yeah, and through the show, I'm sure we're gonna touch on a bunch of little topics that we'll do full shows on later on in the offseason. Things like the transfer portal. I think the number of quarterbacks in the portal this year is unbelievable. But one of the things that I find interesting, if we were to look at your top 5 quarterbacks, one of the names on there was Austin Reed. Austin Reed at the end of the season, number 2 quarterback on the list, puts his name in the portal. And you're like, this is crazy, because he had such a great year at Western Kentucky and he was actually a known commodity. Mm-hmm. And you're like, well, where's he going to go? Well, some of those quarterback names, even though there was a lot that transferred, Austin Reed and Grayson McCall both put their names in the portal and then pulled back out and are staying where they were. So I think that that's one of the things that we haven't really seen before, is guys putting their names in and then pulling back out and going back to where they were already established. So I think that that's going to be interesting to see. Was that the right decision for those guys to stay at the smaller schools that are getting some national notoriety, or should they have been like half the ACC and moved on to greener pastures, so to speak?
For sure. General rule of thumb, I think that if I was educating someone who's new to CFF, go junior, senior. If not any other rule, that's what I would do in a redraft league on quarterback. So running back is a bit different. So it's very evenly spread throughout all of the conferences and in college football. Not a single conference got to 15%. The Big Ten was at 16%. They led the way. No one else made it up to 15%. So you see the scatter chart here where Bijan Robinson and Tyjae Spears, far and away led the way at running back, being the only 2 guys over 300 total fantasy points. But then you get down to the chart where this is the only position where seniors don't dominate. It's juniors that dominate. 46% of the top 36 running backs came from juniors. Only 7% freshmen. Now we all get so excited about a freshman, Evan Stewart going into the class last year as a receiver. Everyone's really pumped about him. Certainly Nick Singleton, and he is, one of the exceptions. Actually, No, he's not quite in the list here. But then sophomore was 22%, seniors 24.5%. And this makes sense when you consider NFL potential. Like, running backs have a smaller window of, how long they're going to last in the NFL. So the great ones leave after their junior year, and that's pretty much, standard. Whereas seniors, a lot of them are coming back. And I was still surprised, though. Only 24.5% of the top 36 running backs were seniors.
I think a lot of times with senior running backs, too, they end up becoming in-season pickups. You see a guy that takes over the depth chart as a senior. That's not normally what happens in, like you said, in college football. It's normally a guy that's going to, get to the top of the depth chart during the season. But yeah, I agree. It normally, especially like in CFP Dynasty, where you're looking for pro potential and college potential at the same time, drafting a senior running back is always a landmine, because you might have him, but you might only have him for 12 weeks, and then he's not even going to make it to the NFL. Like you said, short shelf life for running backs. They want to get out there, go make their money, and follow the juniors.
I agree.
Yep. Dynasty League, certainly don't want to take seniors unless you have to. But otherwise, in a redraft league, yeah, still shocked there by that percentage. So at receiver, like the SEC and Pac-12 were dominant from the quarterback standpoint, but at receiver, the AAC took the lead there at 20%. Conference USA, almost 17%. And then you've got the Pac-12 at almost 13%, Big Ten at almost 13%, and the SEC was only at 3%, even though they had those quarterbacks. So those quarterbacks in the SEC either ran it in or spread it around like a mug. Really, Jalen Hyatt was the only real standout here. Opposite of what we thought, kind of going into the season with Jermaine Burton at Alabama and some other young talent there.
Yeah, I think a lot of those SEC quarterbacks this year were very much so dual threat guys, like a KJ Jefferson type style. Anthony Richardson, obviously, dual threat. There's a lot of those guys that are just dual threat guys that may have like one receiver they feature, and that's kind of about it.
Yeah, so kind of one of the lessons here for me is you want wide receivers from pocket passers, and you really, in most scenarios, don't want a receiver from a dual threat quarterback.
Yeah, I think this year the one exception to that, which was very odd, was UTSA, because you had Frank Harris.
Right.
That's probably one of the one times that it's going to be the exception to the rule there, because he had some receivers that were always in our top 5. We talked UTSA receivers almost every week during the regular season, and Frank Harris is a dual threat quarterback, but that is not something, I agree, that's not something that you're going to see very often, is a productive dual threat quarterback with receivers at the top of the list. Normally it's going to be one or the other.
Yeah, Caleb Williams to Addison comes to mind too for most of the year, but dang, yeah, like I think that's a good general rule here. Take receivers from pocket passing situations most of the time. And then you look at the donut chart here by class, 0 freshmen make the top 36, and then basically 33% across the board, juniors, seniors, and sophomores evenly splitting, the top 36 receivers in fantasy. At tight end, we kind of nailed the big 3 going into the season, just as you would have thought with the Utah tight end, which we didn't expect to be Dalton Kincaid and Michael Mayer and Brock Bowers. Those 3 led the way. If you ended up taking them in round 3, round 4, it worked out for you because majority of the time you're going up against someone who's getting, half the points. And when you can get that kind of advantage at a points per game scenario at a position, that's huge. This is not always the case with tight ends in college football, but this year there was a clear top 3 going into the year, and that's how it panned out with 41% of the top 24 tight ends were seniors. 22% were juniors and 26% were sophomores.
Yeah, that's different than the running backs, because normally, I mean, I can't remember a whole lot of times where you see consistently tight ends coming out early to go to the pros and have success. A lot of times it is the guys that are the upperclassmen and the seniors that are going to the pros and being good there. Yep. You don't normally see tight ends coming out early.
Mm-hmm.
I think the top 3 of those tight ends too are going to be very successful at the next level as well. I mean, they were just leaps and above, how the other tight ends performed. They're game changers for sure.
At kicker, it's pretty easy. Draft a senior, especially if they're on a high-scoring offense.
Yep.
Really, that's about it. We can move along, but yeah, I mean, the top kicker this year, Jake Moody, had 156 points. Podlesny 141 was next, but yeah, senior was 68% of the top 24 kickers. If you got anything, cool, but I think we can move along there. The gap here for defense is what I want to talk about. The gap between Michigan, the number 1 fantasy defense this year, and the number 24 defense, which is typically pretty solid. The gap is over 100 points, which is pretty wild. So you're considering Michigan at 382 fantasy points on the year compared to Duke with 272. So
goodness,
that's a big advantage if you ended up with Michigan this past year. And, their offense kind of helps lead to more fantasy points, but it's those prototype good run-stopping defenses that are up there. Georgia was number 2, Iowa number 3, Bama number 4, and then Illinois. You don't think of them as a great defense, but they run the ball, they control the clock, and don't give up a ton of points with that style. So I think looking at those kind of styles are going to be big. Penn State up there, Clemson. Yeah. So kind of who you would expect, but taking the ball control offenses and using them to your advantage in fantasy defense is big.
And defense is always one of those things too, where it always matters the style of league you're in. If you're in a league that's got unlimited pickups, you can just stream defenses. It's no big deal. In a league like ours, we have limited pickups. You're stuck with the defenses you have. So you have to make sure at the beginning of the year that you're drafting some defenses that are designed for early season play and then some for late season play, because what you're going to get in the beginning of the season, you are never going to want to be playing a Florida Atlantic University or a Western Kentucky in the first 3 weeks of the season, because they're going to be playing their money games. They're going to be out there getting slapped by a Power 5 conference. But then when they get into their conference schedule, things might be different. And vice versa. You might want to have your school, say you have an SEC defense, you might be picking an SEC defense for the beginning of the season and week 12, because SEC historically always plays money games in week 12, which a lot of times aligns with the college championship, but you have to get there. So you do want to make sure you've got a group of 5 defense in the middle to try and hopefully counteract some of that stuff that would happen when Alabama's playing Florida and you might have a higher scoring game.
Yep, for sure.
Totally.
So Doug, I have a question for you.
All right.
So you've been in this league for a couple of years.
It's been 3.
So you've been in the league for 3 years. So, and this year you went to both championships, as we talked about at the beginning of the season. What do you think is one of the most important things that you've learned being in this league? When you came in in year 1, you thought you knew everything. Now at this point, you're like, holy crap, I had no idea about that aspect when I started. I'm so glad I know this thing now.
Honestly, it's just preparation, man. I've always been an NFL guy, and Brian knows this about me. I've known Brian for quite a few years. I've always been a big NFL guy. I'm one of the select few, I think, that's more of an NFL fan than I am a college fan sometimes, but I'm kind of shifting. I love watching these young kids succeed, but man, it's all about preparation. Like, I can't tell you honestly, and I'm going to let my college fantasy nerdness come out a little bit here, but how many hours I put into prepping for real. If you want to be successful, it's buying the magazines, it's reading articles from everybody. Seeing what scouts post on Twitter it's everything.
Yep. And
There's so
hopefully,
much preparation.
and the goal really for CFB is to take Doug's prep, to take my prep and package it together. And so that you don't have to do the prep unless you want to. And it's fun. A lot of people love and crave that stuff like I do. But yeah, that's so important to, being ahead. Things change over the course of the year really quickly. Like you think a team in September, and then in October, the wheels fall off. So there are things that you have to kind of learn and be reactionary about. But yeah, that's a really good point there.
So that's our look at what we learned. Again, if you guys want to go and dig deeper into that article, make sure you go to cfbdynasty.com. Brian, is that available for free, or is that something you have to be a subscriber to get?
Yep, it's free, and it's there under the most recent articles. I did shift around the navigation, I feel like, to make it a little bit easier to understand. So plenty more to come here on the site. But yeah, that's under news and articles, recent posts.
So the next thing we want to do is we want to go to hits, misses, and breakouts. I know, Doug, this was a big thing for you, putting some of these numbers together. The hits, misses, and breakouts for this year. Tell them what this is and what the criteria was to put this list together.
So basically for our hits, breakouts, and misses, we looked at quarterback, running back, and receiver. And for our hits, we wanted to see where we ranked them to start the season and where they ended up, how close we were, how accurate we were with our projections and what we thought was going to happen. For our breakouts, those kids out there that we were like, oh, dang, all right, well, that was definitely not what we expected. And kind of the same for the misses. We expect them to be here and they end up kind of maybe ruining your fantasy season. I know Brian had a couple, I've had a couple. We've all had them throughout our fantasy days, and it's just so frustrating when you expect so much from a guy and they don't give you what you thought they were going to give. So, but basically, we just looked at where we had them ranked, where they ended up, and like Brian said earlier in the podcast, trying to learn from those mistakes or those hits, see what we did right, what we did wrong, and just trying to make it better.
All right, Doug. So let's go over to the quarterbacks. Let's go there. Start with, I guess you're going to go with your hits. Let's start with the hits.
Okay, yep. I'll talk about my number one hit was sophomore Caleb Williams. For CFB, we had him ranked as our number 3 quarterback going into the year, and he actually ended number 1. So we weren't very far off on that. He had a great season all around. But yeah, like I said, he started out for us at number 3 and ended up number 1.
Let me go with a negative one where we sucked. So Brennan Armstrong, yikes. We were wrong as a mug on that one. So we had him. Where did we have him, Doug, going into
Brennan
the
Armstrong
season?
We had at 14, and he ended at 91.
Yikes. So going into the season, I remember the prep very well, and he lost his top 6 O-line. He had all his receivers, Dontavian Wicks coming back and all that stuff. And, he had 500 attempts, 4,400 yards, 31 touchdowns the previous year, and 65% completion percentage that dropped by more than 10% going into 2022. So we expected a drop off, but dang, not that big. So Virginia was just terrible offensively, and that really underscores the significance of an O-line and what we have to look at. So I've considered adding an O-line strength of schedule, potentially just based on talent. It doesn't quite scan to running game versus passing game, because obviously pass blocking and run blocking is a little different. Schemes are different and all that stuff, but at least a talent grade is something we could get to. But yeah, Brennan Armstrong, way off.
I think one of the things BMAC and I have talked about Brennan Armstrong this year is there's another factor that as well. Brennan Armstrong lost his offensive coordinator to Syracuse this year. Robert Anae went to Syracuse. Syracuse, their offense had a breakout season. And now, this year upcoming, both Anae and Armstrong are going to be at North Carolina State. So will we see the rebound for Armstrong, because the offensive coordinator that helped to propel him to national prominence is going to be back reunited with him? So there's a lot of different factors: offensive line, who the coordinators are, what the offensive style is they're going to run.
Yep.
They all play a part. It's not just the name; it's what the situation is they're in as well.
Yeah, I was going to say for Armstrong, I believe the whole coaching staff was different. They got a new head coach too. And kind of like you said, Matt, I think Armstrong's going to have a comeback season with NC State. That team in general is just a fighting team, and they tend to try to make things happen anyways. I think he's going to have a better year this year.
I sure hope so. As a diehard, True Blue Wolfpack fan, I would like to see that.
Yes.
All right, so let's go down the list. Let's talk some more of the people on the list. Who do you want to go to next, Doug?
I'll stick with misses, and I'm going to go with Malik Cunningham for Louisville. I think one of the big reasons for his drop-off is just the offense just looked kind of dry. He went from 2 years where he attempted over 300 passes a season to only attempting 218 passes this past year. And his rushing totals were way, way down, only 500 yards rushing as compared to, I believe he was 1,000-yard rusher the year before. I mean, just the offensive totals were down. Like, I don't know, kind of like we said with Armstrong, I don't know if it's an offensive line thing. I don't know what changed for them so much year to year, but just the offense looked kind of dry this year.
Another one where the offense just looked terrible. Another miss for us would be Van Dyke from Miami. So Miami, we've heard from like coaches that, talk to Josh Pate, late kick, whatever, who have said it's the offensive coordinator and that system that just wasn't a fit for Van Dyke. I was kind of surprised he's kind of sticking around there. The backup did transfer out of Miami, but we'll see what they can do. But we had him projected at 13 because of how good of a freshman season he had last year. And such a strong finish. Like he looked the part. He was on the draft big boards. He was always in the top 1, 2, or 3 quarterbacks, first round projection. And so the whole industry missed. And we'll see if he can have a bounce back this upcoming year, but finishing 121st in fantasy stats, kind of wasn't what we thought, wasn't what we saw going into the new year last year.
It wasn't what anybody thought. Like, I think they also said that he was dealing with a shoulder injury most of the season that wasn't really talked about very much. They kind of kept it on the down low. So, it's kind of hard with injuries, especially on the college side when they're not as visible as it is on the pro side.
Well, I think one of the things too that's very interesting without exposing any other names on your misses list, the misses list is almost entirely ACC quarterbacks. The ACC also saw almost half of the league go into the transfer portal this year. So you want to talk about a league that is going to be completely in flux. It's really hard to be able to project in January of 2023 what the ACC is going to look like, period. If everybody had a down year or has transferred, who knows where the ACC is going to be going into the 2023 season. So there's going to be a lot to sort out in that conference.
Yeah, I'm going to shift the conversation a little bit to the breakouts, and I'm going to go with, obviously, the number one breakout in my mind was freshman quarterback out of North Carolina, Drake May. Had an incredible year. We had him coming in at the 38th, and he actually finished number 2. He had all the tools and put it all together at the right time, and he just looked like the game was never too fast for him. He had, of course, he had his struggle moments, but he just seemed to put it all together for me. He had a great season.
From the jump, too. They were in that quarterback battle going into the season. We didn't know. Going into our draft, we didn't know. There was no announcement yet. And, of course, little sneaky Mike Dillingham takes Drake May.
Snake.
Always Mike Dillingham. Always Mike Dillingham.
You thought Ken Stabler was the snake. It's Mike Dillingham.
That's the guy that I want to beat, guys. Mike Dillingham. I think he's my kryptonite. Maybe Gordy's y'all's, but it's definitely Mike Dillingham for me.
Let me tell you, Doug, your guy at number 2, I want to talk about him because I'm looking at his preseason rank compared to his actual. That's a pretty unbelievable gap in between those two. So talk about your number 2 breakout quarterback.
Got sophomore Riley Leonard from Duke. We had him at 234th in our early rankings, and he ended up 12th on the year. So maybe he should be in my number one spot. Maybe it's because I like Drake May so much that I put him number one. But Riley Leonard had a year, and I'll tell you what, he's probably available in most CFB leagues still, if I could take a guess.
Yeah, in leagues like ours, maybe, but there's not a lot of leagues like ours where typically you get unlimited ad drops, and most people have picked him up. But yeah, in dynasty leagues, like ours, where it's like super limited, it's probably because we're only allowed 3 pickups a year, so it's not super common. But let me talk about another terrible miss. Well. So Cade McNamara for Michigan,
Yeah,
he ended up losing the job. So that's really the story there. JJ McCarthy came in and won that job. They had that weird thing going into the season where Harbaugh was going to play McNamara week 1, McCarthy week 2, and they had like the softest schedule. So they had the full flexibility to do that. It didn't matter. They were going to win both games by a lot. The second game that McCarthy played was at Hawaii, I think, and McCarthy did really well and kind of won that job. And McNamara ended up only playing in 3 games.
Yeah, they put McNamara in that game, and he had like a quarterback rating of 1.8.
Now he's at Iowa, and if I can excite you with some potential going from Michigan to Iowa, Iowa had 7 touchdowns passing last year and 7 interceptions. So I would say it might be a good time to go ahead and dump McNamara if you've got him on a dynasty league.
I was going to say that absolutely does not excite me at all, B-Mac.
Yeah. Keep that defense, get rid of all their offensive players over there. That's pretty much the story we're going with for them.
All right, there's Doug, let's go over to your QB breakouts again. I think number 3 is somebody that nobody really had on the radar. Your 4 and 5 are names we've heard before, but that guy at number 3 really jumped up. So let's talk about who you have at number 3 there.
Yep, at number 3, I've got the junior quarterback from Houston, Clayton Tune. Obviously had a great connection, with his receiver, our number 1 receiver, right, in fantasy this year, Dell. It just, again, like you said, nobody really had him on the radar, but just another kid that kind of quietly put it together throughout the year.
All right, so is there anyone else on the QB list, hits, breakouts, or misses that you want to bring up prior to us going to the running backs?
Sure. One last miss for us. Jerkovic, he was on my fantasy team. We had him at 29th. He finished 125th. Zay Flowers, still had a pretty good year as the top receiver there. Jerkovic was hurt and was always running for his life. That's another instance where the O-line just crushed his potential. And honestly, he'll be a tough one to rank going into the new year. He transferred out, and we'll kind of see how he's going to do at Pitt, who historically has great offensive lines but runs the ball at a higher clip. And we'll see. Jerkovic was like a 2nd or 3rd round pick on a lot of big boards going into the season. And he kind of needs to make up for that as a super senior this year.
And I know we didn't talk about the QB hits very much, but it's always a lot more interesting to talk about the guys that surprised or disappointed.
100%.
But if you look at the QB hits, you've got Dorian Thompson-Robinson, KJ Jefferson, Jaron Hall, John Rice Plumlee, Seth Hennigan. Part of the interesting thing about that is the quarterbacks where we were almost dead on the rankings all hit in the 20s to 30 range. So you saw a lot of guys that were really low that jumped into the top 10 or 12. A lot of guys that were in that top that dropped off the planet, like we just talked about with McNamara. But it seems like that second echelon of quarterbacks, the rankings were pretty solid on because right about where we said they were going to be is where they ended up being. So that's interesting. It's going to be interesting to see when we get to running backs and wide receivers if that trend stays there as well. So let's switch gears. Let's go over to running backs. Doug, where do you want to start? With the hits, the breakouts, or the misses on the running back side?
Well, since we just talked about the quarterback hits, we'll talk about the running back hits for a little bit here. Bijan Robinson, we had him at number 2. He actually came in at number 1. We were, again, within, very few slots of each other on these hits. But it's kind of more, I would say, in the top 40-ish that they were hits. They were pretty close. Injuries kind of derailed some of them. But in the top 40, they were all pretty close on the research that I did.
Yeah, Bijan is one of those guys that really frustrated me this year, not because of what he did, but because at the end of the previous season, it looked like Bijan and Roschon Johnson were going to have a little bit more of a carry split. And I'm not saying it was ever going to be a 50-50 thing, but at the end of the 2021 season, Roschon was actually getting a little more play. We had a couple of really good games, bowl game, and Roschon basically just dropped off the planet. Absolutely dropped off the planet this year. And so somebody like myself that had him on my team, that really hurt because I thought I would have this guy that was going to be a part of a high profile offense that basically just completely disappeared.
One of the things to note too, as you consider like subscribing to CFB and what does that get you, like we'll publish our spring rankings and that'll be kind of free to everyone. And then the deeper rankings, the ones that we adjust all throughout the summer and fall, those are the ones that we're looking at here. And so you'll see like a Nick Singleton where he finished 40th. We had him 41st, but he would have been nowhere in the rankings really in the spring. Not that high, certainly, but it was the fall camp reports that kind of led us to kind of push him up, as you got closer to the season and closer to your individual draft days. So certainly some of those breakouts, though, that we didn't see, like a Judkins.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's move on to the next person you want to talk about, Doug. Who is it? Is he a hit? Is he a breakout? Or is he a miss?
Well, we'll just go with the name that Brian just mentioned, Judkins, who we had in our rankings at 286, and the kid finished 10th. I mean, and when you watch his film, which, we have some highlights of him on YouTube. If you're interested, check it out. But, I mean, he's so good all around. So good.
Yeah, and we obviously, Zach Evans was supposed to be the guy, like the former 5-star, and he came in. He looked really great too. Like, I don't think his draft stock's going to be hurt, but when we get into Devy rankings and adjusting them, Judkins is going to go way up the board because he's going to be a beast. He looks great in terms of NFL potential, and 2 more years left of guaranteed eligibility at Ole Miss.
Mm-hmm.
Doug, let's jump over to your running back misses because the names on that running back misses are names that we talked about in 2021. We talked about preseason. Brian and I lamented over so many of these guys on the milk carton segments during 2022. The names on this list are unbelievable. Doug, let's pick somebody on that running back misses list and let's grill them.
I will let Brian talk about the number 1 guy on this list for me. I'm going to go to a guy that I was really high on that was actually on my draft board that got swooped up. Thank God, honestly. And I'm going to talk about sophomore Braden Bennett out of Coastal Carolina, who we had ranked at 27th, and he actually finished 408th. Apparently, there was an injury. It was undisclosed. Nobody talked about it. Sidelined him for the first 10 weeks of the season. Then he came in on November 12th for 4 games, only managed 16 carries for 63 yards in those 4 games. Like, I can honestly tell you guys that I probably had him as the number 3 running back on my draft board this year. And somebody picked them up, and I want to give them a high five when I see them in our next draft because they definitely saved me. So
yeah. All right. So Travion Henderson now, like we had him number 1, right? It was neck and neck there with him and Bijan, and could have gone with either one seemingly in the season. Like all the mock drafts that we were a part of throughout the industry, like those were typically, the top 2 running backs and very commonly the top 2 players selected. If you drafted Bijan, good for you. If you drafted Travion, yikes. So we had him number 1. He finished 142. He battled injuries. He battled, other running backs getting touches and stuff. Mayan Williams had a really good stretch in terms of fantasy, like during the season. But yeah, just battled an injury, really never took off. Like going into the year with his talent as, the running back one when he came out of high school, and seeing what he did his freshman year, and knowing that Stroud doesn't really like to run, like this they're in a hyper productive offense, like you just assume that Travion is going to kill it. But didn't happen. And it's going to be interesting debates internally on where we rank him, because I know I've got the traded for the second pick in our draft, like early on in the season. I always like to do that, try and root for someone else's draft pick to be good and not mine. So I'll try and do that every year. But it worked out where I'll have the second pick. Thank you, Sean. And I would trade that for Travion Henderson. I don't know about you guys, but I think, Doug, you said you wouldn't.
No, I probably wouldn't. I mean, especially with, the other running backs that they have over there that showed at the end of the year that that room's a little bit deeper than I thought.
How about you, Matt? Would you be okay with Uncle Joe having the first 2 picks in the draft? Would you rather have that second pick or Travion?
I'd probably rather have the second pick, just because I feel like I'd rather pick a guy that I don't have any questions about.
True.
I feel like a guy that's got some questions, or a guy that has gone in to perform bad, I don't want to be going, I hope this guy is going to have a rebound season, a bounce back season. I want to pick a guy that I know is going to be amazing. But I think that this is interesting. You bring up the number 2 pick. In our draft this past year, because we're drafting to fill gaps, so we don't have the full roster out there. In our draft last year, the guy with the number 2 pick in the draft took Tavion Thomas from Utah.
Yes, he did.
So Tavion Thomas was picked with the number 2 pick. People were trying to trade up to get that pick so they could get Tavion Thomas, and Tavion Thomas absolutely crapped the bed. So Doug, let's talk about Tavion Thomas. What was his CFB rank? Where did he end up?
So Tavion Thomas's CFB rank was 10, and he ended up 122nd. Missed a lot of playing time, missed a lot of games. I don't think it was as much injury related. And, I've read a lot of stuff about him because I was kind of curious, what caused the drop off with him. I'm hearing, locker room fights.
Yep.
Coaches have called him out for his accountability and his consistency issues. So basically it's bad attitude and even worse choices for Thomas. Honestly, I don't think it was his playing ability. Just think it was a mindset for him.
How about your guy there? Cameron Peoples, we had too high going into the year. We had him 19th, kind of seeing that offense, knowing what they have been at App State, and thinking, okay, if Cameron Peoples potentially will be the lead guy against Nate Noel there, Phil Steele had him as an All-American in the conference, but it didn't happen.
Yeah, Cameron Peoples is such a weird case study, because he's always been one of those guys where, like, he'll have a great game, and then the next game he gets like 1 carry, and you're like, why?
Yep.
It's just the flow of the game flow, and it felt like going into last season that was not going to be the case, and that was exactly the case again, where Cameron Peoples barely ever came off of my bench because you just couldn't trust him. As you can see, his actual was 155th, and let's say every team in the league started 3 running backs every week. That's only 36 running backs. There's no business to be starting the 155th ranked running back, and that's a shame, because Cameron Peoples is a touchdown machine. When he gets the ball, he does a lot of good things, but there's times he just doesn't get the touches.
And you'll see that change in rankings this year. We'll certainly degrade App State running backs because of that until they prove it. And that's one of those things where you need a known commodity, especially if you're taking like one of your top 3 running backs. So same really with Northern Illinois, Doug, which you had some experience with Harrison Whaley, and then like freshmen by the end of the year, where it was like one game he might go for 200 plus yards and 2 or 3 scores, and then the next week gets a couple touches. It's so weird.
Yeah, it's so frustrating because you never know. I mean, you and I had a conversation about this in one of my playoff games. It was like, do I go with a guy that's got a tough matchup? Do I go with a guy that could potentially get 4 touches or 26 touches and 250 yards?
Yep.
Fortunately, I went with the guy with a tough matchup, and he proved why he was one of my top running backs this year, and Dwayne McBride. But, you know, it's so frustrating because you got these kids that you know are talented, but they just don't touch the ball.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go with one more breakout on running back real fast because it's a kid that I actually like watching, especially watching so much football with, Danny Tucker, who's a huge Florida State fan. I just want to mention, Trey Benson real fast from Florida State. The kid's a bruiser. We had him ranked at 267th, and he came in at 57. And I just see that getting even better with Ward transferring out.
Yep.
He beat so many good running backs in that organization to just keep doing what he was doing. I mean, the guy's just a bruiser, and he's a really good running back. And I just want to mention him because he's somebody that's super exciting to watch.
When we get to our teams trending up segment, FSU is going to be up there. Like those running offenses that Norvell had at Memphis, they were like fantasy gold. And that could be coming for Benson and FSU. Depending especially to potentially thinking of the running game when they don't have a dual threat quarterback as good as Jordan Travis in the future. Like this FSU running back room could be incredibly valuable and something you want to get in on early in dynasty leagues, especially if you can kind of identify who's going to be that next guy, after Benson and Jordan Travis are gone. One other that we missed on that was just a freaking shock. We had 5th, Lou Nichols. Finished 125th, and he was another one that was just a really, really odd case study. In 2021, he led the nation with over 1,800 rushing yards, and between some weird injuries and O-line, like if you were watching the NFL draft, you would keep seeing these, like it was later on in the draft, but you'd see all these Central Michigan guys getting drafted, and you started to think, man, maybe that offense isn't going to be as good. And then you read through the fall, and I'm telling you, like, O-line is so important. We will be looking at it heavily going into our rankings to kind of spot a guy that might drop off, like a Lou Nichols who led the nation and then had a huge drop off to like 3.4 yards per carry.
Yep. Even the vice versa is the same. There's so many like kids in the transfer portal this year. Some of these big O linemen going to another school. Maybe that school is going to have a breakout running back, or that quarterback's going to play better. I think offensive line is definitely something that we need to keep tabs on and look at that, just to not only help ourselves and our teams, but help you guys and your teams too, because the O line seems to be kind of where it's at when it comes to depending the play on how these guys are going to perform.
Totally.
All right, so let's jump over to wide receivers. So I am actually going to just really quick run down the hits because the hits are the easy part. The fun part to discuss is the breakouts and the misses. Mm-hmm. So on the hits, Nathaniel Dell, definitely somebody that hurts my heart because I had a chance to draft him and I went with Cedric Tillman, and Cedric Tillman decided to break my heart. But Nathaniel Dell, we had him at 6. He was the number 1 guy in college fantasy sports this year. Then guys where we projected right about where they were going to be. A.T. Perry from Wake Forest, projected him at 12, actual 10. Allie Jennings from Old Dominion, projected him 36, went to 33. Taj Washington, USC, projected him at 139, projected him at 95. He came in at 98. Kobe Hudson, UCF, projected him 116, 125. So those are some guys that, whether it's the top of the board or lower down the board, we pretty much got their spot almost dead on. But the ones that are fun to talk about are the breakouts and the misses. Doug, why don't you start with some of your breakouts? I know BMAC's going to want to go to the misses.
Oh, he's going to want to go to the misses for sure.
So why don't you start with some of the breakouts? Who are the guys that were breakouts that we did not see coming?
So, briefly, Jalen Hyatt, somebody that Danny got as a pickup in our league, which was a great pickup, who came at 209th and ended up 6th, all partly because of your boy Tillman. So
what could have been, Matt?
So we thank you for that, Matt. We thank you for that, buddy.
How could that have changed your playoff run there if you had another elite receiver to go with an already good group?
Basically, to not even have a first round pick, and don't get me wrong, Cedric Tillman probably going to be a good pro, still have some potential there in our league. But as far as the college side of it, it was like I just went in and said, hey, you know what? I don't need a first round pick this year. I'll just leave that spot open. I'll put him on my injured list for the whole year and see what I can do. Things did not go so well. So thank you, Cedric Tillman, for giving someone else all of the glory in the Tennessee offense. I'm going to remember this.
And then I'll hit another one that is actually, a really, really good receiver. Looking at his game film and stuff is Charlie Jones for Purdue. We had him at 240 and he finished second. I mean, these receivers are so hard to judge sometimes. It takes, one receiver in the lineup going down with an injury, or all of a sudden this kid just puts it together. And you just never know what's going to happen with some of these guys.
We were on the wrong guy with him. So Tyrone Tracy was the talk of camp. He was going to get running touches. He was going to play the slot there in an offense where that's heavily used. And we just were on the wrong guy. And Tyrone Tracy, who I also drafted in our league, sucked all year.
Yeah, it was a change in the guard for Purdue for sure, and it wasn't expected by me either. Like you said, so many people talked about, that receiving room, and Charlie Jones wasn't really the guy that was talked about. And I'll go with one more that I'm getting really familiar with. I know a lot of people probably don't know this name, but it might be a name you want to learn. I'm going with Michael Sturdivant. Was the freshman receiver, and he actually just entered the transfer portal. He was our CFB 454th receiver, and he ended up 75. He's one that's exciting for me, and I may give this away. I'm looking at him in my draft. Brian, Matt, take note, especially somebody that played in 2 championships this year, even though I lost both. But, I think Sturdivant is going to be a force to reckon with in the future, especially, with how good of a season he had last year as only a freshman.
I like it. All right, let's get to some misses here.
Talk about your boy.
All right, Kayshawn, LSU. We had him at third. He finished 208th. He was a DraftKings battle through the first half of the year because as his value kept going down, I kept thinking, oh, snap, one of these days he's going to break out. The breakout didn't come. It's really that simple. So that was rough. Dontavian Wicks, we hit on him. We had him 13th. He finished in the 300s. And that was, a product of their O-line, top 6 being gone at UVA, and that crushed the offense. Jermaine Burton is one that did come on in the playoffs and in the bowl game and late in the season, not in the playoff. And we had him at 7th, though, kind of projecting a breakout for him. That didn't happen. So he actually finished.
Well, they are they are getting a new offensive coordinator, so we'll see if that helps.
Yeah, true. We talked about during the season. This was the first year where you really see that blue chip, top of your lineup, Alabama wide receiver. Alabama has just nonstop every year just been producing high quality wide receivers for years. And this year, completely non-existent from a fantasy perspective. So it definitely kind of took everybody by surprise, but it's inevitable that at some point, those offenses that produce positions year in and year out are going to have a down year. That was this year's Alabama wide receiver corps for sure.
So that's a good transition to Miles Price then. So the whole industry was in on Miles Price and for good reason. Like he was taking over a position at Texas Tech where, that's a historically like high volume, high target kind of position. And he did battled some injuries, but also took a step back, kind of losing the job to Bradley a little bit there. But man, they had a quarterback, circus all year long. That's definitely something to kind of consider, even at a place like Texas Tech.
Yeah, when the consistency is not there, then it's at the quarterback position, it's hard to have a receiver that's going to be consistent.
Yep.
And I'll hit one more miss, which I thought was really funny when I looked at this. You got Xavier Williams, who started his career at Alabama, then transferred to Utah State. Now he's transferring again. We had him ranked at 49, and he came at 1,034th with 1.2 fantasy points. I just wonder with somebody that is that transfer happy, is if he just can't win a starting job anywhere. I mean, you go from Alabama to Utah State, and you still can't win playing time. You know,
that seems like a transfer to an FCS kind of level right there. If you have 1,034th, how many teams did you have to have in your league for somebody to have to consider starting him in fantasy football?
Right.
So he may be the kind of guy that needs to drop down a division to see if he can win over some lesser competition.
For sure. So as far as my hits and misses, that's pretty much where I'm at with those. But it was really fun to look at, especially the misses, because you get to dive in real deep and see what happened. And like I said, it's all preparation, man. This type of stuff you do in the offseason to try to win a championship. So
without going too long, we want to also just talk about in CFB in our home league, what we felt like for our personal hits and misses. I'll just be really quick with mine. Obviously, we've already talked about it a lot. Cedric Tillman was a miss. We can't predict injuries. He still could be a good pro, but when you waste your first round pick on a team that was completely wide receiver deficient, I had either 6 or 7 wide receivers graduate or go to the pros and do nothing in the pros last year. So my wide receiver room and my running back room were both pretty bare. And I'm like, Cedric Tillman, he's going to be the foundation for my team this year. Not so fast, my friend. That is not what happened. I decided that I wanted to go freshman heavy on running backs, and I got Damian Martinez from Oregon State. I feel like that was my hit. He was one of the most productive freshman running backs in the country, and I look forward to seeing what he's going to do at running back for the hopefully next 2 years before he goes pro. And then my breakout is a guy that I had on my team that has performed well, but last year really went to the next level, and that was Frank Harris at UTSA. Frank Harris became a must start, especially with all the turmoil with Devin Leary at NC State and Grayson McCall at Coastal Carolina, who are the other quarterbacks on my team. Frank Harris became a must start and was just putting up stats, one of the only dual threat quarterbacks that was putting up elite numbers running and passing this year. So, Doug, let's quickly go to your hits, misses, and breakouts on your roster this year.
All right, so my miss, someone that I drafted in the 3rd round who I thought was going to take my receiver core to the next level was Isaiah Nair out of Texas. Drafted him 3rd round. I think it was 12 days later he went down with a knee injury.
No. It was the same day as our draft. So it was like 2 hours
that
after
evening.
The draft ended.
Oh, well, thanks, Brian. That makes me feel so much better. So I think next year I'll for this next draft, I'm just going to wait and draft after everybody else is done. No, I'm just kidding. But
hey, you know what? Hey, I approve of that suggestion. Done.
he was definitely my miss. And that one hurt because I was excited about him. My hit, somebody that Brian knows firsthand that I loved since, the end of last season, and talking about him was Raheem Rocket Sanders from Arkansas. I didn't have a 1st round pick. I was able to get him early in the 2nd round in our draft, and the dude killed it. I mean, I will say he won me a lot of games. So he's just a solid running back. I'm excited that I get to have him, in the future, because I can see a lot of pro potential in him too. And then my breakout was close. I was going to put Dwayne McBride up there. I expected big things from him, so I didn't put him on there. I put somebody on that I got, as a pickup in the season who helped me get to the championship, and I put Bo Nix out of Oregon on there.
Yep.
He was dropped in our league,
What a year.
And I put him on, and he pretty much didn't leave my starting position after I picked him up.
Yep.
And I think looking at your team as well, your draft last year admittedly was probably number 13 in a 12-team league. You did not have a good draft. You had a great solid team. You made some great moves otherwise, but you still got to the championship. So it shows that the draft isn't the be all end all. I mean, obviously you want to have a great draft, but you took a draft that did not chart very well, and you found a way to still get yourself all the way to the college championship and be a feared team. Let's be honest. Nobody wanted to play Doug because Doug's team was smashing people, and it did not come from the draft last year.
Well, that's one thing that I've talked to B-Mac about a little bit, is I haven't had a first-round pick since I started, and that's okay. I feel like my production comes in those 3 pickups we have in the year. I miss so often in a first and a second round pick that I'm like, okay, we're just going to see where we're at. But that's the joys of having this team that builds on itself every year is if you can keep that foundation firm, those you can afford to miss once in a while on a draft. Honestly, if you have a firm foundation, missing on a draft I think I had 8 picks this year. I think I missed on 3 or 4 of them. I mean, but my foundation was good.
For me, so let me, you can't ever out-coach really good talent, they say. And let me tell you about a guy who's on my fantasy team that, crushed his output last year. Eric Gilbert put up 8.6 fantasy points this past season.
Solid.
Far surpassing what he did the year before of 0. So it's been awesome having him take up a roster spot. But that's where I'm at.
But positive, Brian, as he transferred again.
Yeah. Maybe he'll play.
Maybe he'll get 16 points this year.
He's just trying to see if he can sign with every team in the SEC, and that's his goal.
No, he's over at Nebraska now. So.
Well, yeah, I don't know why
is getting a bunch of transfers right now.
It's just like the weather in Florida. Let's wait 10 minutes, and it's going to change. Let's see where he transfers coming next week.
Yeah. So Jackson Dart was someone I was pretty excited about going into the season. Lane Kiffin has a great history with fantasy production out of the quarterback spot, but he's also just such a superb coach. They went from a great passing offense and they became the number 1, non, Army or Navy running back. They were the best Power 5 running team in the country this past year, and mostly coming from a freshman. So good on him. Jackson Dart did look really good at the end of the year, and now they've got a huge battle in that quarterback room. So that one's going to be interesting. But yeah, my crown jewel, who I started, even not enough when I benched him one time against when he played against Michigan. Chase Brown still had a great game. So he was one that we were ahead on. We were talking about him all last offseason as one of our top sleepers, and he definitely pulled through.
All right, guys. So there is the hits, misses, and breakouts. So we're about to wrap this podcast up, but I want to know from you guys, what are you excited to talk about as the off season progresses? There's going to be quite a few of these shows that are going to lead into when the draft comes. We were talking about months from now. Doug, let's start with you. What is it that you're most excited about to be able to touch on one of these podcasts as the off season goes along?
Man, this portal tracker is insane. I love the chaos. Being able to, work with Brian every day, I'm getting used to the chaos. So, I love the chaos, and I think that the portal tracker is going to be even crazier once spring ball's over. Like Brian said, with the Ole Miss situation, those quarterbacks going over there, I guarantee you 2 of them are probably going to transfer again. So it's just one of those things. I am looking forward to diving deep into the portal tracker and talking more and more about it, because it's just crazy this year. I think there was almost 1,900 players that entered. So
yeah, that's the next show. That'll be a fun one. How about you, Matt?
I'm going to go with exactly what Doug just said. I think that the portal, if you go back, say 10 years, the biggest day in the off season was signing day. Everybody looked towards signing day, or it was who's going to be the early entrance into the draft. Now, between early signing day and the portal, they all kind of have equal importance. Guys that are leaving early, the portal, the early entrance, the portal, the late signing day. But to me, the portal is huge because the portal is guys that are hoping to have a direct impact on your team next year. The signing day, even though it's a big deal, you have less of a chance that those guys are going to have direct impact on your team that following season. So being able to look at where guys are going and why, is that going to be a good fit for them? Is the guy that's going to step up at their previous school going to be able to fill that gap? What was the reason they transferred? I look forward to seeing where our portal rankings are, because to me, that's just as important as the guys coming out of high school.
Yeah, if not more important for fantasy, kind of given the donut charts we looked at earlier. Yeah, I guess for me, I love obviously talking about the freshmen. That's going to be a fun show that we're going to do like right after signing day, kind of going over our freshman rankings. But I'm going to stick to the basics, the standard spring rankings, like that first, like I'm a natural organizer, right? So if you invite me over to your house, I'll, organize your closet or whatever if you want me to. But I like putting these rankings together, figuring out, looking at the data, looking at, articles and different things and deciding where these guys are going to be ranked. And then, of course, adjusting them as the summer and as the fall news hits and all that stuff. But portal is freaking insane. But that'll be our next week's show.
All right. So, yeah, I can't wait to get to that. So there's one more piece of business for us to take care of. And if you guys saw the shows at the end of the season, we talked about doing a Bowl Mania. Myself and Brian and anyone else who wanted to jump in did our bowl pick'ems. And we said anybody that was not me or Brian that came in first would get a free subscription to CFBDynasty.com next year, as expected. And I would think that as somebody who is a potential subscriber to CFBDynasty.com, BMAC came in first. So if you're a potential subscriber, it's good to know that the guy who is putting these rankings together actually was first in doing the bowl prognostication. So we have to take him out of the loop. He actually got 29 bowls right. The next person was Broken Controller himself, Mr. Danny Tucker. He is a player, one of the OGs from the home league. So Danny Tucker gets the free subscription. But here's the thing. Danny Tucker's a guy that we've known for years. The whole point of us doing this is we want you guys out there that are listening to this that are in all reaches of the country. We want you guys to participate in that next year because we want to be giving it to somebody in Wyoming or Wisconsin or North Dakota or Massachusetts. We don't care. We want it to be somebody that has found us on the Discord or found us on YouTube, that's jumped in, become a part of the community, and found a way to get a benefit from this that goes over and above the rankings that you get on the site. So that being said, BMAC, if you had to pitch to somebody what the benefit is of going up and being a part of the Discord, tell them why the Discord is so important for CFB Dynasty.
Well, it's nice once it gets to a point where we want. And right now it's just not there yet. So we have 100 and some people in there, maybe 200 now, but still need to get that to where we're able to kind of give feedback together, looking at trades and all that stuff, potential trades, and talking about that on the show, taking questions and getting more interaction. And it's just going to, it's something we've still kind of newly launched. Hasn't even been around for, 8 or 10 months yet. So we've got room to grow it, and we plan on that being a big part of just interaction as we go along. And one of the things we want to do there, we have like 5 or 6 really cool tools that are going to come out and benefit all subscribers during the season this upcoming year. So we'll have a split, price as normal for the draft kit, and then a separate one for the in-season tools. And it's going to be awesome. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to drop all of the insider stuff, demos and whatnot there in the Discord only to try and encourage everyone to kind of be there and kind of engage.
And the best thing about the Discord is it's free. All you got to do is just go to Discord, sign up, become a part of the community now so you can be in on the ground floor and you can get this information. One of the best things about last year was there were times we get on the podcast and we had to make sure that we were answering the questions that were coming from the Discord. So you guys putting your comments up on the Discord sometimes found yourself and found your name being a part of this podcast. The bigger it gets, the more elite it's going to be, because we might have 50 questions in a week. We aren't going to be able to get to all 50 of them. So make sure you put up a great question. And we want you guys to be a part of this community. We want you guys to help to craft what happens here, help to craft what happens on the CFBDynasty.com website, help craft what happens on the Discord. Doug, did you enjoy being a part of the Discord last year? If so, why? And you better say yes.
Oh, well, I definitely enjoyed it. I got a little bit. Brian had me help answer some questions and stuff. It was really fun interacting with the people on there, helping them out with their teams, and just answering their questions, man. I've always been a guy that likes to help people out, and, also a guy that they can blame if it doesn't work the right way. So, they don't have to blame themselves anymore. They can blame me if it doesn't work. So it's a lot of fun.
That sounds like a good idea coming from the guy who lost 3 fantasy championships in a single season.
3.
All right, guys. So that wraps it up. Doug, if somebody wants to get in contact with you, I assume probably on the Discord, what is your username on the Discord if somebody wants to go and message you directly?
That's a really good question.
It's at Doug.
It's at Doug.
At Doug. Hey, you know what? So they're literally the only Doug out there. BMAC, what about you?
Yeah, same. Just hit me up on the Discord. You can find me. Brian McElfresh -CFB Dynasty. Hit me up. Let's chat. Let's talk about ideas, tools that you want to see. We're building 6 new ones, but maybe you guys have different ideas, things that you want to see. We want to be the end all be all in college fantasy, so you guys can kind of help us get there. Things you want to see differently and all that.
And you can hit me up at Dr. Anguish. I think I have 2 accounts up there also, Matt/InSim. Either one of them is going to get to me. Mm-hmm. You can also go to insymmetrycreations.com if you really just want to get a hold of me on Facebook, Twitter, the website, so you can see the other content creation things that I do as well. That being said, looking forward to the next show, the best CFF impacts from the portal, the best movers in the portal. Looking forward to that show. My name is Matt Knowles. On behalf of that guy, Brian McElfresh, and our guest today, Doug Gravely. Thank you guys for coming out to the CFBDynasty.com podcast. We hope to see you next week.